The world tells us that the US dollar is strong because of confidence, stability, and democracy. But what if I told you there is a hidden web of financial engineering that most people and even most economists never see? A secret architecture, built over decades, that holds an empire together, and that, if it falters, could unravel everything we take for granted. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain and reveal the forces that make the dollar and the US global dominance possible. It starts in the shadows of history. After World War II, the United States emerged not only as a military superpower but also as the financial epicenter of the world. Europe lay in ruins, Asia was rebuilding, and global trade desperately needed a stable currency. Enter the Bretton Woods system, designed by a small group of economists and policymakers who would come to define modern finance. Names like John Maynard Keynes loom large, but American figures like Harry Dexter White quietly shaped a system that ensured the dollar would be the linchpin of the global economy. Under Bretton Woods, the US dollar was pegged to gold, and other currencies were pegged to the dollar. This created a perception of uncheckable stability. Countries accepted dollars not because they loved Washington, but because they trusted gold's value. Yet even at this early stage, cracks were forming. The system depended on the United States maintaining massive reserves of gold while simultaneously running deficits to supply the world with dollars. It was a delicate balance. One misstep could trigger a crisis. By the 1960s, that misstep was inevitable. The U.S. had engaged in large-scale spending programs and a costly war in Vietnam. Gold reserves could not keep pace with the flood of dollars leaving the country. Foreign governments began demanding gold in exchange for dollars. The world was waking up to the possibility that the dollar might not be as invincible as it seemed. Then came 1971, a date economists will never forget. President Richard Nixon made a move that shocked the world. He closed the gold window, ending the dollar's direct convertibility to gold. This bold decision marked the birth of the modern fiat dollar, a currency backed not by tangible assets but by the authority and perceived stability of the U.S. government. It was both a solution and the start of a new set of vulnerabilities. Without the gold anchor, the dollar floated freely, and the world had to accept it because of U.S. economic and military dominance. But maintaining that dominance required new mechanisms. The U.S. forged strategic alliances with oil-producing nations, offering military protection and political support in exchange for the guarantee that oil would be priced and traded in dollars. This agreement, informal yet powerful, created the petrodollar system, effectively forcing nations to hold dollars to participate in global oil markets. This was the secret architecture, dollars circulating worldwide, accumulating in foreign reserves, then returning to U.S. banks, allowing the government to borrow and spend with unprecedented freedom. The system appeared self-sustaining, a feedback loop of financial control cloaked in normalcy. For decades, it worked flawlessly, or so it seemed, but every empire eventually faces stress tests, and the U.S. was no exception. The 1980s brought massive debt expansion, first with consumer credit, then with government borrowing. The dollar surged and fell, manipulated by interest rates, trade balances, and Federal Reserve interventions. Global confidence remained high, but the cracks were growing. Behind the scenes, exotic financial instruments, derivatives, and complex swaps multiplied risk while creating the illusion of stability. The 2000s ushered in a new era of vulnerability. Financial deregulation and the explosion of mortgage-backed securities amplified systemic risks. The 2008 financial crisis exposed how fragile the architecture had become. Banks collapsed, governments bailed out institutions deemed too big to fail, and yet the dollar maintained its global dominance. Why? Because the secret architecture had adapted. The Federal Reserve and Treasury coordinated massive liquidity injections, and the dollar remained the world's reserve currency, still perceived as safe. The story doesn't end there. Modern parallels are striking. U.S. national debt has surpassed $35 trillion. The Federal Reserve now commands tools unimaginable in the 1970s. Yet, confidence is increasingly based on perception rather than concrete backing. Other nations, China, Russia, and emerging powers seek alternatives, creating a slow erosion of dollar hegemony. Still, patterns repeat. The same mechanisms that held the empire together decades ago are deployed again, with tweaks and patches, delaying an inevitable reckoning. One of the most revealing aspects is the feedback loop of foreign reserves. Countries hold U.S. debt in exchange for stability, effectively financing U.S. deficits. The U.S. spends, the global economy relies on dollars, and the cycle repeats. It's a subtle form of economic leverage that ensures geopolitical dominance without conventional conquest. Yet, the system relies on trust, a fragile commodity that history shows can evaporate quickly. Consider military spending. It is funded largely by borrowed dollars, yet the U.S. maintains the largest military presence worldwide. This duality, borrowing to project power while maintaining a currency empire, creates immense strain. Every new conflict, every fiscal stimulus, and every emergency intervention stretches the system further, making long-term stability less certain. Technological innovation has also played a role. The digitization of finance, from high-frequency trading to central bank digital currencies, adds efficiency but increases complexity. The very tools meant to strengthen the monetary system can, under stress, accelerate instability. The architecture is invisible to most, yet it underpins every transaction from Wall Street to small-town America. This architecture also explains political paradoxes. Economists warn about unsustainable deficits, yet policymakers rarely act decisively. Why? Because the system can operate on borrowed trust for decades. The dollar's global role allows temporary fixes to appear permanent. The empire continues to function, but only as long as faith in its currency persists. Yet faith is not infinite. Patterns from history offer stark warnings. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, and others all relied on economic systems underpinned by perceived stability. When confidence faltered, collapse accelerated. The U.S. faces similar dynamics today: high debt, rising competition, and internal political polarization. The secret architecture cannot eliminate human error or geopolitical shocks. Data reinforces the fragility. U.S. Treasury bonds are still widely held, but foreign appetite is shifting. Global debt is at record levels, financial instruments are more interconnected than ever, and even small miscalculations could trigger cascading effects. The petrodollar arrangement is being challenged as nations diversify reserves and trade in alternative currencies. Patterns from past empires suggest that no architecture, however sophisticated, is eternal. Despite these risks, the system continues to adapt. Quantitative easing, low interest rates, and strategic alliances are deployed to maintain the illusion of stability. The Federal Reserve has become a global lender of last resort, effectively ensuring the dollar remains dominant. Yet these measures are reactive, not preventative. The underlying architecture remains vulnerable to shocks beyond the control of any single institution. This hidden financial web also affects daily life. Every consumer purchase, every investment, every bank transaction relies indirectly on this global system. People assume stability is natural, but it is carefully engineered. Understanding the mechanics behind it reveals both the ingenuity and the risk of relying on invisible systems that few fully comprehend. The story of the U.S. monetary architecture is also a story of power. It allows America to project influence economically, politically, and militarily without conventional colonization. Dollars circulating abroad bind nations together in subtle dependency. It is, in many ways, an empire maintained by accounting, trust, and strategic leverage rather than armies alone. Yet empires are not immortal. The system faces long-term threats, rising global competitors, political fragmentation, and internal fiscal pressures. The architecture has evolved, but historical parallels show that once momentum shifts, collapses can be rapid and severe. What looks permanent today could vanish tomorrow, leaving markets and citizens unprepared. The lessons are clear. First, power today is deeply tied to financial engineering, not just military might. Second, perception and trust are as crucial as tangible resources. Third, every fix applied to the system, whether through bailouts, currency swaps, or monetary policy, creates temporary stability while sowing seeds for future crises. The warning is explicit: rely on the US dollar, the global reserve, and the feedback loops that sustain it at your own peril. The architecture is brilliant, but brilliance is no guarantee of permanence. Empires, economies, and currencies are ultimately human constructs, subject to human flaws. Understanding these forces is not optional, it is essential for anyone who wants to grasp the underpinnings of modern global power. The final takeaway is a call to curiosity and vigilance. Question assumptions, examine hidden systems, and look beyond the headlines. The U.S. empire is held together by more than armies, ideology, or a democracy. It is held together by an intricate, fragile, and largely invisible monetary architecture. So what does the future hold? Perhaps reform, perhaps crisis, perhaps a gradual erosion of influence. The secret architecture will continue to adapt, but history reminds us that no system lasts forever. Awareness is the first step to preparation. If you found this exploration enlightening, hit the like button, share this video with others who seek deeper understanding, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our world. The story of money is the story of power, and knowing it is knowing how the world really works.